The rescue helicopter circled the crash site for the third time, its searchlight cutting through the thick jungle canopy like a desperate prayer. The low, twisted metal and burning fuel painted a scene that every military family dreads. The radio had been silent for 18 hours. The mission was supposed to be routine. Commander Sarah Mitchell and her team of elite operatives were meant to extract vital intelligence and return by dawn. Instead, all that remained was wreckage, smoke, and the haunting certainty that no one could have survived. The families had been notified. The memorial service was being planned. The mission was officially declared a catastrophic failure with all hands lost. But deep in that unforgiving wilderness, something extraordinary was happening. Something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about survival, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of combat. This is the true story of what happened when hope died, only to be reborn in the most impossible way imaginable. The morning mist clung to the mountains like a shroud as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell adjusted her tactical gear one final time. At 34, she had led more covert operations than most soldiers saw in a lifetime, but something about this mission felt different. The intelligence they were after could change the course of the war, hidden in a compound so remote that satellite imagery showed nothing but endless green canopy. Her team consisted of 5 of the most skilled operatives in the military. Sergeant First Class Marcus Kane, a demolitions expert who could disarm a bomb blindfolded. Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, whose marksmanship had earned her the nickname Ghost for how silently she eliminated targets. Technical Sergeant David Park, their communications specialist who could hack into enemy systems faster than most people could type. Corporal Jake Thompson, barely 22 but already legendary for his reconnaissance abilities. And Senior Airman Maria Santos, their medic whose quick thinking had saved more lives than anyone could count. They had trained together for 3 months, studying every inch of the target location, memorizing escape routes, and preparing for contingencies. The mission brief was straightforward: extract critical intelligence about enemy troop movements from a remote research facility, neutralize any threats, and exfiltrate within 6 hours. Simple on paper, but Sarah knew that the simplest missions often became the most complicated. The flight to the drop zone took 2 hours in a specially modified helicopter designed for stealth operations. As they flew over increasingly hostile territory, Sarah reviewed the mission parameters one more time with her team. The facility was located in a valley surrounded by dense jungle, accessible only by a narrow mountain pass that would be heavily guarded. Their insertion point was 3 miles from the target, requiring them to traverse difficult terrain while remaining undetected. Marcus checked his explosives kit for the 10th time, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. He had been in the military for 15 years, and his wife Jennifer was expecting their first child in 2 months. He carried her ultrasound picture in his breast pocket, right next to his heart, a reminder of what he was fighting to protect. Lisa sat quietly, her eyes closed as she mentally rehearsed the sniper positions she had memorized from the reconnaissance photos. She came from a family of soldiers. Her father had served in Vietnam. Her brother was currently deployed in Afghanistan, and her sister was training to become a pilot. The military was in her blood, but she had never faced a mission with stakes this high. David constantly monitored the radio frequencies, listening for any chatter that might indicate their approach had been detected. At 26, he was the youngest member of the team except for Jake, but his technical skills were unmatched. He had grown up in Silicon Valley before deciding that he wanted to serve his country, bringing civilian tech expertise to military operations. Jake stared out the helicopter window, his sharp eyes scanning the terrain below for anything that seemed out of place. He had an almost supernatural ability to spot danger before it became a threat, a skill that had kept his previous teams alive through countless operations. His girlfriend Emma was a teacher back home, and he planned to propose to her when he returned from this deployment. Maria sat between the others, her medical kit organized and ready for anything. She had joined the military after losing her brother in a terrorist attack, determined to save lives and protect others from experiencing the pain her family had endured. Her calm presence had a steadying effect on the entire team. As they approached the drop zone, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. Weather conditions were deteriorating faster than expected, with storm clouds building over the mountains. They had a narrow window to complete the insertion before the weather made extraction impossible. Sarah made the decision to proceed. The intelligence was too valuable to delay, and their window of opportunity would close if they waited for better conditions. The team checked their equipment one final time as the helicopter descended toward a small clearing barely large enough for the aircraft. The insertion went perfectly. Within minutes, they had unloaded their gear and the helicopter had disappeared into the cloudy sky, leaving them alone in hostile territory. The jungle was eerily quiet except for the distant rumble of thunder that promised the approaching storm would be severe. They moved through the dense vegetation with practiced stealth, Sarah leading the way while Jake scouted ahead. The terrain was more challenging than their training had prepared them for, with steep ravines hidden by the thick canopy and unstable ground that threatened to give way under their feet. 2 hours into their approach, Jake signaled for the team to halt. He had spotted a patrol that was not supposed to be there according to their intelligence. 8 enemy soldiers were moving through the area, heavily armed and clearly searching for something. Sarah realized that their mission might have been compromised, but they had come too far to turn back now. Using hand signals, she directed her team to take concealed positions while they waited for the patrol to pass. Lisa found an elevated position where she could provide overwatch, while Marcus prepared charges that could create a distraction if needed. David monitored enemy communications, trying to determine if their presence had been detected. The patrol moved past their position without incident, but Sarah knew their timeline was now compressed. If enemy forces were actively searching the area, it would not be long before their presence was discovered. They had to reach the facility, complete their mission, and get to the extraction point before the net closed around them. The research facility was exactly where the intelligence had indicated, but the security was much heavier than expected. Instead of the handful of guards they had been briefed about, Sarah counted at least 20 enemy soldiers patrolling the perimeter. Worse, there were vehicles positioned at strategic points that could quickly respond to any threat. Sarah gathered her team in a small depression that provided concealment while they developed a new plan. The original approach was no longer viable, but the intelligence they needed was inside that facility. Lives depended on the information they could gather about enemy troop movements and planned attacks. Marcus suggested using his explosives to create multiple diversions, drawing the guards away from the main building while a smaller team infiltrated the facility. Lisa identified several positions where she could provide suppressive fire if things went wrong. David found that he could tap into the facility's communications network if he could get close enough to their transmission equipment. Jake had discovered a drainage tunnel that led directly under the main building, but it was partially collapsed and would be extremely dangerous to navigate. Maria pointed out that if anyone was injured during the infiltration, their chances of reaching the extraction point would be severely compromised. Sarah weighed their options carefully. The storm was getting closer, and their extraction window was shrinking. But the intelligence they sought could save hundreds of lives if enemy attack plans could be disrupted. After consulting with each team member, she made the decision to proceed with the modified plan. The infiltration began at exactly midnight. Marcus positioned his charges at strategic points around the facility, timed to detonate in sequence and create maximum confusion. Lisa took her overwatch position on a ridge overlooking the compound, her rifle trained on key personnel. David approached the communications equipment, ready to hack into their systems once the diversions began. Sarah, Jake, and Maria entered the drainage tunnel, crawling through muddy water and debris toward the main building. The tunnel was in worse condition than Jake had initially assessed, with sections completely blocked by fallen concrete and twisted metal. They had to use their knives to dig through the obstacles, precious minutes ticking away as they struggled forward. The first explosion lit up the night sky as Marcus's charges began detonating according to plan. Enemy soldiers rushed toward the diversions, shouting commands and trying to coordinate their response. Lisa began picking off key personnel with precision shots that sowed further confusion among the defenders. Inside the tunnel, Sarah's team was making progress despite the obstacles. They could hear gunfire and explosions above them as the diversions drew attention away from their route. Jake used a small camera to check their exit point, confirming that the basement of the main building was clear. They emerged into a storage room filled with crates and equipment, their clothes soaked and muddy from the tunnel crawl. Maria treated a cut on Sarah's arm where she had scraped against sharp metal, while Jake secured their exit route. Above them, they could hear running footsteps as enemy personnel responded to the ongoing diversions. The intelligence was stored in a secured server room on the second floor of the building. Sarah and Jake moved through the corridors while Maria maintained security at their exit point. The building layout matched their briefings exactly, but they encountered unexpected security measures including electronic locks and surveillance cameras that David was supposed to disable from outside. Without David's technical support, they had to improvise. Jake used his lock-picking skills to bypass the electronic systems, while Sarah kept watch for enemy personnel. They could hear the battle raging outside as Marcus and Lisa continued their diversions, buying precious time for the infiltration team. The server room contained exactly what they had come for: detailed plans for a massive enemy offensive that was scheduled to begin in 72 hours. Sarah downloaded the files onto encrypted drives while Jake documented physical intelligence with his camera. They had what they came for, but getting out would be the real challenge. As they prepared to return to Maria's position, they heard voices in the corridor outside. Enemy personnel were conducting a systematic search of the building, having realized that the diversions were cover for an infiltration. Sarah and Jake had to find another route back to their exit point. They descended to the first floor, using the service stairway, avoiding the main corridors where enemy soldiers were conducting their search. The building shook as another of Marcus's charges detonated, and they could hear Lisa's rifle continuing to engage targets outside. When they reached the storage room, Maria was waiting with disturbing news. Enemy reinforcements had arrived and were surrounding the building. Their original escape route through the tunnel was now compromised, with soldiers stationed at both ends. They were trapped inside the facility with nowhere to run. Sarah made contact with Marcus and Lisa through their radio system. The diversions had been successful, but enemy forces were regrouping and closing in on their positions. David had been forced to abandon his attempt to hack the communications system when a patrol had nearly discovered him. The storm that had been building all evening finally arrived with devastating force. Rain poured down in torrents, while lightning illuminated the battlefield in stark detail. The weather would make their extraction more difficult, but it also provided cover that they desperately needed. Sarah knew they had to fight their way out. The intelligence they carried was too valuable to fall into enemy hands, and her team was counting on her to get them home safely. She began planning their breakout, knowing that not all of them might survive what was coming next. The mission had taken an unexpected turn, but they were not defeated yet. Sarah Mitchell had led her team through impossible situations before, and she was determined to do it again. Outside, thunder crashed like artillery as the storm reached its full fury, setting the stage for a battle that would test everything they had learned about survival, courage, and loyalty. The real challenge was just beginning. The first enemy patrol discovered David's position at exactly 0247 hours. He was crouched behind a communications relay, trying to establish contact with their extraction helicopter when the soldiers appeared through the rain like ghosts. His training kicked in instantly, and he managed to eliminate 2 of them before their return fire forced him to abandon his equipment and flee into the jungle. Sarah heard the gunfire through her radio and knew their situation had gone from difficult to desperate. David's voice crackled through the static, reporting his position and the fact that he was being pursued by an unknown number of hostiles. The communication equipment he had been protecting was destroyed, meaning they had lost their primary means of coordinating with their extraction team. Inside the facility, enemy soldiers were methodically searching every room. Sarah, Jake, and Maria were trapped in the storage room as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside their door. Jake positioned himself behind a stack of crates with his weapon ready, while Maria prepared her medical kit for what she knew was coming. Sarah clutched the encrypted drives containing the intelligence that had cost them so much to obtain. The door burst open and enemy soldiers poured into the room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jake opened fire immediately, his shots precise and deadly in the confined space. Sarah and Maria flanked the attackers from different angles, using their superior training to overcome the numerical disadvantage. The firefight was brutal and quick, leaving 5 enemy soldiers dead and Jake wounded in the shoulder. Maria worked quickly to treat Jake's injury while Sarah checked their ammunition. They were running low on everything, and more enemy personnel were converging on their position. The sound of boots on stairs indicated that reinforcements were arriving from multiple directions, trapping them in the storage room with no obvious escape route. Outside the building, Marcus was running low on explosives, but continued creating diversions to draw attention away from Sarah's team. His charges had damaged several enemy vehicles and eliminated key personnel, but he was being hunted by an entire squad that was closing in on his position. Lisa provided covering fire from her sniper position, but she could see enemy soldiers moving to flank her through the storm. The rain was so heavy now that visibility was reduced to just a few yards. Lightning illuminated the battlefield in brief, terrifying snapshots, enemy soldiers advancing through the jungle. Vehicles burning from Marcus's explosives, and the dark bulk of the facility where Sarah's team was trapped. Thunder crashed constantly, masking the sounds of gunfire and making communication nearly impossible. Sarah made the difficult decision to split her team. Jake's injury would slow them down, and someone needed to stay with the intelligence in case the others did not make it out. She ordered Maria to remain with Jake and defend the storage room while she attempted to fight her way to Marcus and Lisa's positions. The intelligence drives went with Sarah, ensuring that even if the worst happened, their mission might still succeed. Maria protested the decision, but Sarah's authority was absolute. Jake was losing blood despite Maria's treatment, and moving him would likely kill him. Sarah handed Maria her backup weapon and extra ammunition, then prepared to leave the relative safety of the storage room for the chaos outside. The corridor was a war zone. Enemy soldiers had barricaded both ends and were advancing slowly, using grenades to clear each room. Sarah moved through the building using service passages and maintenance areas that were not shown on the standard blueprints. Her knowledge of similar facilities allowed her to navigate routes that the enemy did not expect. She reached a window on the second floor and used her rope to descend to ground level, avoiding the soldiers who were concentrated on the main entrances. Once outside, she had to cross 50 yards of open ground to reach the jungle, where Marcus was fighting for his life. The storm provided some concealment, but enemy searchlights swept the area constantly. Sarah sprinted across the compound during a particularly intense lightning strike that temporarily blinded the searchlight operators. Bullets whined past her as enemy soldiers spotted her movement, but she reached the tree line without being hit. Behind her, explosions rocked the facility as Maria and Jake continued their desperate defense of the storage room. Marcus was pinned down behind a fallen tree, surrounded by enemy soldiers who were advancing from 3 directions. His ammunition was almost exhausted, and he had sustained multiple injuries from shrapnel and gunfire. When Sarah appeared through the rain like an avenging angel, he thought he was hallucinating from blood loss. Together, they managed to break the encirclement. Sarah's fresh ammunition and tactical skills allowed them to eliminate the immediate threats and withdraw to a more defensible position. Marcus was barely conscious, his injuries more severe than he had initially realized. Sarah made the painful decision to carry him despite knowing it would slow their escape. Lisa had been forced to abandon her sniper position when enemy soldiers finally located her hide. She was moving through the jungle, trying to reach the extraction point while being pursued by at least 6 hostiles. Her rifle had run out of ammunition, forcing her to rely on her sidearm and combat knife. The dense vegetation provided concealment, but the enemy knew the terrain better than she did. David was in similar circumstances, wounded and alone, trying to evade capture while making his way toward the extraction coordinates. His radio had been damaged during his escape, leaving him unable to communicate with the team or coordinate their movements. He could hear gunfire from multiple directions, indicating that his teammates were still fighting, but he had no way to help them. The extraction helicopter was supposed to arrive at 0400 hours, but the storm made flying extremely dangerous. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Hayes, was fighting her own battle against the weather as she tried to reach the pickup coordinates. Wind gusts threatened to slam her aircraft into the mountains, while lightning strikes could disable her electronics at any moment. Sarah dragged Marcus through the jungle, following a stream that would lead them toward the extraction point. His weight was enormous, and her own injuries were beginning to affect her performance. Blood from a head wound obscured her vision, and exhaustion was setting in after hours of combat. But she refused to abandon her teammate, even though carrying him made them both easier targets. Behind them, the facility was fully engulfed in flames. Maria and Jake had been forced to abandon the storage room when enemy grenades made their position untenable. They were fighting a running battle through the building, Jake barely able to walk despite Maria's medical treatment. Enemy soldiers were closing in from all sides, and their ammunition was nearly exhausted. Marcus regained consciousness briefly, realizing that Sarah was carrying him at tremendous personal risk. He tried to convince her to leave him behind, knowing that his weight was preventing both of them from escaping. Sarah refused to listen, adjusting her grip and continuing through the storm despite his protests. Lisa emerged from the jungle near the stream, having successfully evaded her pursuers by using her superior fieldcraft skills. She was exhausted and wounded, but alive and functional. When she spotted Sarah carrying Marcus, she immediately moved to help, taking some of his weight and allowing them to move faster toward the extraction point. The 3 of them struggled through the storm, supporting each other as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Behind them, they could see the glow of the burning facility and hear the continuing sounds of combat as Maria and Jake fought their desperate battle. David was somewhere in the darkness, hopefully making his own way to safety. At 0355 hours, they reached the extraction point, a small clearing that was barely large enough for the helicopter to land. Sarah activated her emergency beacon, hoping that the pilot would be able to navigate through the storm to reach them. The rain was so heavy that they could barely see 10 feet in any direction. Chief Hayes received the beacon signal and began her approach, fighting against wind that threatened to tear her aircraft apart. She could see lightning strikes hitting the mountains around her, and her instruments were being affected by the electrical activity. Landing in these conditions would be extremely dangerous, but she knew that soldiers were counting on her. Maria and Jake had been separated during their escape from the building. Jake, weakened by blood loss and barely conscious, had insisted that Maria continue without him. She refused initially, but when enemy soldiers appeared in the corridor behind them, Jake made the decision for both of them by providing covering fire while ordering her to run. Jake's last radio transmission was cut short by gunfire. Maria reached the jungle alone, tears streaming down her face as she realized what had happened. She had lost a teammate and friend, but she still had a duty to reach the extraction point and report on their mission status. At the landing zone, Sarah, Marcus, and Lisa waited in the storm for their helicopter to arrive. Marcus was fading in and out of consciousness, his injuries severe enough that he needed immediate medical attention. Lisa had fashioned a crude stretcher from branches in her poncho, allowing them to move him more easily when the aircraft arrived. The sound of rotors cutting through the storm was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever heard. Chief Hayes brought her helicopter down in conditions that should have been impossible, using her exceptional flying skills to navigate through the wind and rain. The aircraft touched down hard, bouncing on the uneven ground before settling into position. They loaded Marcus into the helicopter first, his unconscious form requiring careful handling. Lisa climbed aboard next, helping to secure the wounded soldier, while Sarah maintained security around the landing zone. They waited precious minutes for Maria and David to appear, but the forest remained dark and silent except for the storm. Sarah made the agonizing decision to order Chief Hayes to take off. The fuel situation was critical, and staying longer would endanger everyone aboard. As the helicopter lifted off, she stared into the darkness below, unwilling to abandon her teammates but knowing she had no choice. The flight back to base was harrowing. The storm battered the aircraft constantly, and Marcus went into cardiac arrest twice during the journey. Lisa and the crew chief performed CPR, while Chief Hayes fought to keep the helicopter airborne. They were racing against time and weather, with lives hanging in the balance. Maria never reached the extraction point. Exhausted and disoriented, she became lost in the jungle as the storm reached its peak intensity. David was captured by enemy forces while trying to cross a river swollen by the rain. Both of them were alone in hostile territory with no hope of rescue. When the helicopter finally landed at the base, Marcus was immediately rushed to surgery while Sarah was treated for her injuries. The mission was initially classified as a partial success. They had obtained the critical intelligence, and 3 team members had been extracted alive. But 2 soldiers were missing and presumed dead, making it feel like a failure to everyone involved. Sarah spent 3 days in the medical facility, recovering from her injuries and being debriefed by intelligence officers. The information they had obtained was indeed valuable, allowing Allied forces to prepare for the enemy offensive and potentially save hundreds of lives. But the cost had been enormous, and Sarah blamed herself for the loss of her teammates. The official report listed Jake Thompson and Maria Santos as killed in action, with David Park missing and presumed dead. Memorial services were planned, and their families were notified of their sacrifice. The mission was classified at the highest levels, meaning their heroism would never be publicly recognized. Marcus survived his surgery but faced months of rehabilitation. His injuries would end his military career, but he would live to see his daughter born and watch her grow up. Lisa was promoted and recommended for commendation. Her actions during the mission having saved multiple lives through her precise marksmanship and tactical skills. Sarah was offered promotion and reassignment, but she requested to remain in theater. She could not accept that 2 of her teammates were gone, and she began planning an unauthorized mission to return to the area and search for survivors. Her superiors eventually had to threaten her with court-martial to prevent her from going back. For 6 months, the official story remained unchanged. Jake Thompson and Maria Santos were dead, killed during a classified operation that had achieved its objectives despite tragic losses. Their names were added to memorials, and their families received folded flags and condolences from grateful commanders. But deep in the jungle where they had fought and bled, something extraordinary was happening. Something that would challenge every assumption about survival, loyalty, and the impossible bonds that hold soldiers together in the darkest moments. The storm that had seemed to end everything was actually just the beginning of a story that no one could have imagined. The mission that everyone thought had failed was about to reveal its greatest secret. The call came at 0630 hours on a Tuesday morning, 6 months and 12 days after the mission that had haunted Sarah Mitchell's dreams every night since her return. She was in the base gymnasium, pushing her body through another punishing workout designed to exhaust her mind enough that she might actually sleep, when her commanding officer found her. Colonel James Harrison's face was unreadable as he approached, but Sarah knew him well enough to recognize the signs of barely controlled excitement beneath his professional demeanor. He had been her mentor for 8 years, and she could read his expressions like a familiar book. Something significant had happened, something that was about to change everything she thought she knew about that terrible night in the jungle. The communication had come through channels so classified that only a handful of people in the entire military hierarchy were cleared to receive it. A remote monitoring station, one of dozens scattered throughout hostile territories to intercept enemy communications, had picked up a signal that should have been impossible. A coded transmission using protocols known only to Sarah's lost team members, broadcast on a frequency that had been compromised during their mission. The message was brief, transmitted in the personal code that each team member had developed for emergency situations. It contained coordinates, a time reference, and most impossibly of all, confirmation codes that proved beyond doubt that at least one member of her lost team was still alive. The transmission had been weak, probably sent from makeshift equipment, but the encryption was perfect and the authentication was genuine. Sarah stared at the printout Colonel Harrison handed her, her hands trembling as she recognized Maria Santos's personal transmission signature. The medic who had been listed as killed in action 6 months ago was not only alive, but actively trying to make contact. The coordinates placed her approximately 40 miles from their original mission site, deep in territory controlled by hostile forces. The implications were staggering. If Maria was alive, what had happened to Jake and David? Were they prisoners? Or had they also found ways to survive in one of the most dangerous regions on Earth? The transmission suggested that Maria had access to communications equipment and enough technical knowledge to modify it for their specific protocols, which meant she was not only surviving but actively working to re-establish contact. Colonel Harrison explained that a response team was already being assembled, but the mission would be extraordinarily dangerous. The area where the transmission had originated was heavily patrolled by enemy forces who had increased their presence significantly since the original operation. Any rescue attempt would face overwhelming odds, and the chances of success were minimal at best. Sarah volunteered immediately, as Harrison knew she would. Despite his concerns about her emotional involvement in the situation, she was the only person who knew Maria's capabilities and thinking patterns well enough to predict her actions. More importantly, she was the team leader, and bringing her people home was her responsibility, regardless of what the official reports said. The rescue team was kept deliberately small to maximize their chances of avoiding detection. Besides Sarah, it included Marcus Kane, who had recovered enough from his injuries to return to limited duty, Lisa Rodriguez, whose sniper skills might prove crucial, and 2 specialists from another unit who had experience in hostage rescue operations. Marcus had insisted on joining despite his medical restrictions and his wife's concerns about his return to active duty. The birth of his daughter had given him new perspective on the value of life, but it had also strengthened his resolve to leave no soldier behind. His relationship with Maria went back years, and he blamed himself for not being able to protect her during the original mission. Lisa had been training obsessively since their return, pushing her marksmanship skills to even higher levels while studying every available piece of intelligence about the region where they would be operating. She had developed a personal connection to each of her lost teammates during their months of preparation, and Maria's survival meant there was hope for the others as well. The insertion was planned for maximum stealth, using a high-altitude parachute drop that would place them 20 miles from the coordinates. They would have to traverse hostile territory on foot, locate Maria without alerting enemy patrols, and somehow extract her from an area where they would be vastly outnumbered. The mission parameters were similar to their original operation, but this time they knew exactly what they were facing. Satellite imagery of the coordinate location showed what appeared to be a small village or settlement, but the resolution was not sufficient to determine whether it was occupied by civilians, enemy forces, or something else entirely. The transmission had included a specific time reference, suggesting that Maria was planning to make contact at predetermined intervals, but they had no way of confirming this without revealing their own presence in the area. Sarah spent the night before their departure, reviewing everything they knew about Maria's capabilities and likely survival strategies. As their medic, she had extensive training in field medicine and improvised treatments, skills that would have been crucial for surviving serious injuries. She also had basic survival training that would have taught her to find food and shelter in hostile environments. The parachute insertion went perfectly, with all 5 team members landing within a mile of their target coordinates during the darkest part of the night. They quickly buried their parachutes and established a concealed observation post overlooking the area where Maria's transmission had originated. What they found there challenged every assumption they had made about her situation. The settlement was indeed occupied, but not by enemy forces. Instead, they observed what appeared to be a small community of civilians who had been displaced by the ongoing conflict in the region. Children played in the cleared areas while adults worked to maintain their temporary shelters in gardens. It looked like a refugee camp, but there was something about the organization and security measures that suggested military influence. Sarah spent hours observing the settlement through her binoculars, searching for any sign of Maria or evidence that would explain the transmission. The people below appeared to be genuine refugees, but their camp was too well organized and defended for civilians who had simply fled the fighting. Someone with military training was clearly directing their activities. As the sun began to set on their second day of observation, Sarah spotted a figure that made her heart race. A woman emerged from one of the largest shelters, moving with the precise, efficient gait that Sarah recognized immediately. Even at distance and partially concealed by civilian clothing, there was no mistaking Maria Santos's distinctive profile and mannerisms. But Maria was not alone. As she moved through the settlement, Sarah could see that she was accompanied by a man who limped heavily and required her support to walk. The distance was too great to make a positive identification, but the way he moved suggested serious injuries that had healed imperfectly. Sarah's mind raced as she considered the possibility that Jake Thompson had also survived their mission. The observation continued through the night as Sarah's team documented the settlement's routines and security measures. They counted approximately 50 civilians, including many children, all of whom appeared to be genuine refugees rather than combatants. The defensive positions were subtle but effective, suggesting that whoever had organized the camp understood military tactics and the necessity of remaining hidden from hostile forces.
On the morning of the third day, Sarah made contact.
Using a secure radio frequency that only her original team had known, she transmitted Maria's personal call sign and waited for a response. The reply came within minutes, confirming not only that Maria was alive and in control of the situation, but that she had been expecting contact from her surviving teammates. The reunion was emotional but necessarily brief. Maria emerged from the settlement alone, using predetermined signals to indicate that the area was secure for a meeting. When she saw Sarah approaching through the jungle, both women struggled to maintain their professional composure despite the overwhelming relief of seeing each other alive. Maria's story of survival was extraordinary. She had indeed been separated from Jake during their escape from the burning facility, but she had managed to evade capture and find him badly wounded but alive in the jungle. His injuries were severe multiple gunshot wounds, a concussion, and internal bleeding that threatened his life. Using her medical training and improvised supplies, she had managed to stabilize his condition and move him to safety. They had spent weeks hiding in caves and abandoned structures, with Maria treating Jake's injuries while avoiding enemy patrols that were searching the area. Her medical skills had undoubtedly saved his life, but his recovery was slow and incomplete. He would never be fully functional as a soldier again, but he was alive and determined to help protect the civilians they had encountered. The refugee settlement had been Maria's idea, created to provide cover for their continued presence in the area, while helping displaced families who had nowhere else to go. She had used her military training to organize defenses and establish routines that would keep the group safe from both hostile forces and the various dangers of their environment. Jake helped as much as his injuries allowed, serving as an advisor and secondary leader, but the most shocking revelation was still to come. David Park was also alive, though his situation was more complicated than either Maria or Jake. He had been captured during the original mission, but had managed to escape from enemy custody after several weeks of imprisonment. His technical skills had proven valuable to the resistance groups operating in the region, and he was currently working with them to disrupt enemy communications and supply lines. David's escape had been facilitated by the very people his captors had been fighting against. Local resistance fighters had infiltrated the prison facility and freed several captured soldiers, including David, as part of a larger operation against enemy forces in the region. His knowledge of enemy communication protocols had made him invaluable to their efforts. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed this information. Not only were all three of her lost teammates alive, but they had been actively working against enemy forces for months, while being presumed dead by their own military. The intelligence they had gathered during this time was potentially more valuable than what they had obtained during the original mission. The challenge now was how to extract them without endangering the civilians they had been protecting. Maria was reluctant to abandon the refugee settlement, knowing that the people there depended on her leadership and medical skills for survival. Jake's injuries made him difficult to transport, and David was embedded with resistance forces who needed his technical expertise for ongoing operations. Sarah made the difficult decision to extend their mission timeline and establish a more permanent presence in the area. Rather than attempting an immediate extraction, she would use her team's capabilities to strengthen the refugee settlement's defenses while developing a comprehensive plan for bringing everyone home safely. Marcus was assigned to work with Jake on improving the settlement's security measures, using his demolitions expertise to create defensive positions that would protect the civilians if they were discovered by enemy forces. Lisa established sniper positions that would provide early warning of approaching threats while also serving as a deterrent to hostile patrols. The two specialists from the rescue team were tasked with developing extraction routes and communication protocols that would allow for a coordinated withdrawal when the time came. They also began training selected refugees in basic security measures, creating a network of observers who could detect threats before they became critical. Over the following weeks, Sarah's expanded team worked to consolidate their position while gathering intelligence about David's situation with the resistance forces. Contact was established through secure channels, revealing that he was not only alive and well, but had become a key figure in the local opposition to enemy forces. David's technical skills had allowed the resistance to intercept enemy communications and predict their movements, preventing several attacks on civilian targets. His value to their cause was enormous, but he was also eager to reunite with his original team and eventually return home to his family and friends who believed him dead. The coordination required to bring everyone together safely was complex, involving multiple resistance cells, the refugee settlement, and Sarah's rescue team. Enemy forces had increased their patrols in the area, apparently aware that something significant was happening, but unable to locate the specific threats to their operations. After careful planning and preparation, the reunion took place at a secure location deep in the jungle, far from both the refugee settlement and the resistance bases. Seeing her entire team together again was one of the most emotional moments of Sarah's military career. They had all changed during their months of separation, marked by injuries and hardships, but they were alive and had continued serving their mission in ways no one could have anticipated. Jake's injuries had indeed left him permanently disabled, but his intelligence and tactical knowledge remained sharp. Maria had developed new medical skills and leadership abilities that would serve her well in any future assignment. David had become an expert in unconventional warfare and resistance operations, knowledge that would be invaluable to his home unit. The extraction itself required weeks of additional planning and coordination with multiple friendly forces in the region. The refugee settlement was gradually relocated to safer areas with help from humanitarian organizations, ensuring that the civilians Maria had been protecting would continue to receive care and support. David's work with the resistance forces was transferred to other technical specialists who could continue his efforts. When the rescue helicopters finally arrived to collect Sarah's team, they were extracting not just the 3 soldiers who had been presumed dead, but a wealth of intelligence and operational knowledge that would benefit ongoing military efforts in the region. The mission that had been classified as a partial failure 6 months earlier was revealed to have achieved far more than anyone had imagined possible. The homecoming was deliberately low-key, with extensive debriefings and medical evaluations conducted away from public attention. The families of Jake, Maria, and David were notified that their loved ones were alive, but the circumstances of their survival remained classified due to ongoing operations in the region. Sarah's team was eventually recognized for their extraordinary service, though the specific details of their achievements would remain classified for years to come. Jake received medical retirement with full honors, Marcus was promoted and assigned to training duties that would not aggravate his injuries. Lisa became an instructor at the sniper school, Maria was assigned to a prestigious medical unit, and David joined a specialized technical warfare division. But the most important recognition was personal. Sarah had brought her entire team home alive, fulfilling the promise that every leader makes to their soldiers. The mission that everyone thought had failed had actually succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, proving that determination, skill, and loyalty could overcome even the most impossible circumstances. The story of their survival would eventually become legendary within military circles, studied by strategists and taught to new generations of soldiers. But for Sarah and her team, the real victory was much simpler. They had proven that no soldier is ever truly lost as long as their teammates refuse to give up hope. The mission that had started as a routine intelligence gathering operation had become an epic tale of survival, courage, and the unbreakable bonds forged between soldiers who fight together in the darkest places of the world.